All right, we're back on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, and we're going to turn the page to the Cleveland Cavaliers now because last night in the draft lottery, they've landed where we thought they would, 14th pick. Nothing to get excited about because, yes.
Trade the pick.
There are guys. Yeah, I know you want to trade it. There are guys.
Bradley Beal. You gave me that Bradley Beal trade today.
There are values that have been found 14 and later in the draft, and the Cavs have done pretty good in the draft recently, but we're going to bring in Evan Dremel right now. He covers the Cavaliers for Locked On Cavs, and does a great job too, by the way. He's really plugged in on the Cavs. If you're a Cavs fan, you definitely should pay attention to what this guy does on Locked On. Evan, great to be with you. So 14 doesn't excite anybody, but you got to make the pick unless you're going to trade it. I know you've been looking at possible mocks and players they might be interested in. Give us a couple of names that we can start thinking about who the Cavs might have on their early radar.
So it's two schools of thought, really, when it comes to the Cavs and drafting. Do you want to draft a guy who can make an immediate impact, or is this a guy you want to stash the back end of your rotation, maybe keep him on your bench, let him develop, let him marinate, let him grow? So it's those two schools of thought. So you could look at Ohio State. You have E.J. Liddell, who could be more of an immediate impact player. You have Malaki Branham, who could be more one of those upside players as well, because he has the potential to be like a plus shooter long term too. And then you could say the same thing about Dyson Daniels too, if you want to look at the development aspect, or maybe even LSU's Terry Eason. There's a lot of options for Cleveland at 14. I heard you guys talking about trading the pick as well. I think that's definitely something the Cavs should consider too, because let's be frank, they were a win away from making the playoffs. They unfortunately lost to Brooklyn and Atlanta, and they got a consolation prize, so they could maybe grab one of these high upside kids and trade them into maybe a bigger star, or somebody who can just complement this roster and round things out for them so that they can just make that push into being a playoff team instead of having to kind of do the song and dance in the play-in tournament.
Evan, that's what they got to do. I mean, let's be honest. Are we trying to win a championship, or are we just trying to be the Indiana Pacers for the next 10 years and hang around the 8th spot? The Cavs have to be aggressive. Dan Gilbert, I've criticized him at times because he meddles too much, but he's done a better job of not doing that recently. But now he's always been aggressive. And the Cavs have 3 awesome players. 3 guys who are all-stars or borderline all-stars who are going to get better, especially Mobley and Garland, especially Mobley, because once his offensive game develops, forget it. They need to use this pick and Colin Sexton and whoever to get a 4th excellent player, all-star player. Now, maybe that's not possible. You tell us what you think, Evan. But that's what they, in my opinion, they should do. A veteran, not too old, but a veteran player who's an all-star or borderline all-star player. We were talking Bradley Beal before. Yep. We were talking DeJounte Murray, who I love. You know, let's go get one. I mean, again, maybe it's not possible. Maybe I'm crazy to think they could get him without trading one of the big 3, because I'm not trading one of the big 3 for anything. But if I can get one of those 2 guys or somebody of that ilk, by trading Sexton and draft picks. I don't care if they give him 32 draft picks. Let's go. I want to win.
Well, I don't think 32 draft picks would be realistic, obviously. But
Bull likes to exaggerate.
I think you are in the right. I think you're in the right school of thought. You do have it's weird to say big 3, but 3 untouchable players in Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen. How do you build around those 3? And I think the task is on the Cavs to figure that out, because let's be frank, no one expected a lot from this Cavs team heading into this season, and they really caught everybody by surprise, but they're going to surprise no one next year. So they have to really be prepared and not be too afraid of how big the moment is. But I think Brad Beal might be a little bit just unrealistic as a target for Cleveland, just because it's been well reported he wants to sign a Supermax extension with Washington, which would pay him about 35% of their salary cap off the top of my head, which is a tough pill to swallow. And I think if you're the Cavs, maybe you shy away from that if you're just not able to financially accommodate a guy who may not want to be there long term. But DeJounte Murray does make a lot of sense. I think him being close to Darius Garland helps a lot too. Them both having the same agency.
Yeah, but Evan, what do they have to give up to get him?
It'd have to be 14. It'd have to be a combination of 14, Sexton, probably a Coro as well, and then maybe a future first, and then maybe another future first on top of that. It depends on how San Antonio values him, because DeJounte Murray is an all-star caliber guard, and he's kind of the best player on the Spurs right now, but they are in a weird spot where they're kind of good, but they're kind of bad, but maybe they should lean towards being bad because they have so many just young players that they need to develop, but they're in flux, and I think Murray makes a lot of sense for this Cavs team just in terms of pairing him with Garland as just a backcourt partner long-term, but again, like I said at the top, if you're Cleveland, you have to consider all options because also bringing in a rookie is cheap, cost-controlled talent, too, that you can kind of keep on the payroll long-term and not worry about straining yourself financially now and then possibly 2-3 years from now as well because Garland has to get paid, Mobley has to get paid. So many players are going to have to get paid in the next few years, and you only have so much money to go around.
Yeah, Love money coming out, and if you traded Sexton, his money would come out. I don't know. I think you play to win. The draft pick's a crapshoot.
I don't disagree with playing to win. It's just I think because the expectations were so low going into this season, and now that there's maybe a little bit of an onus on this Cavs team to kind of build something out of this, you have to consider all your options and weigh everything. And I think the Cavs are historically an aggressive team in terms of trades and just making acquisitions. Kobe Altman, I believe, leads the league in trades leading up to the NBA trade deadline. But I think you maybe make a cautious and a methodical approach, and you see how this draft pans out too. Because I'm in Chicago at the combines today; they're doing measurements and everything else. I think there's going to be teams who fall in love with players during the interview process, the pre-workout process, and there's going to be a guy who falls. And if it's a guy who the Cavs just cannot pass up on, I don't see why you wouldn't consider taking him, and then possibly even using him as a trade chip long term as well too, because guys can get frustrated about their situation as well. Things can change a lot between now and later this summer, so there's a lot of different things in flux here, and it's a fluid situation overall. So it's an interesting time for the Cavs, and I think, like I said, just building around that big three is just your big goal this offseason, and then you move forward from there.
Evan, who is your top three prospects in this draft? And the reason that I ask is it possible that the Cavs can put a trade package together to trade up in this draft and get that person?
I don't think, if you want to say Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero, Jabari Smith, even Shaedon Sharpe from Kentucky, even though he didn't play for them this year, I don't think those guys are obtainable, because if you're looking at teams like Oklahoma City, Houston, Sacramento, who made a surprising jump as well, and Orlando, there's a reason why they're picking at the top of the draft. They need to get this top-end talent. And I think if you're Cleveland offering anyone outside of Mobley, Garland, and Allen, it's not going to entice a lot of teams to jump. But if you stick at 14 or in that range, I think Dyson Daniels from the G League Ignite makes a lot of sense, because he's a 6'8" guard. He actually grew 2 inches since the G League season ended, which is pretty crazy to think about. Malaki Branham, like I mentioned, EJ Liddell makes a lot of sense to Terry Eason. There's a lot of guys here, but I just don't think the Cavs really have the ammo and assets to go up and get one of those top players, because you don't really want to hamstring yourself asset-wise if you want to go all in and maybe make another big trade to acquire a player that is more all-star caliber and maybe doesn't need more time to season.
You know, there's a name that I've been following for a while. Imani Bates played at Memphis. Is he in this draft? And if so, he's 2-3 times player of the year. I think he won the player of the year as a sophomore. Was going to go to Michigan State, decommitted, went to Memphis, did not work out well in his first year. Is he gonna be in this draft? And if so, where do you think he goes?
No, he's not draft eligible this year just because of age and high school rules. He'll be draft eligible next year, and I think just because of his potential, despite him not panning out at Memphis, I think he's in the transfer portal right now. So looking at his options there, he's going to be more of a top talent in next year's draft.
Evan, before we let you go, I know this is ridiculous, because when you're talking about the 14th pick, you have no idea what's going to happen in the first 13. But we do these ridiculous exercises because we fill 2 hours every day. So we're going to ask you to play along. If you were to do a mock right now and no trades happen, who is left at 14 in your mock draft, and who would you select? Have you gone that far with this yet?
I haven't gone that far yet, because you want to hear maybe who teams are talking to player-wise. Interviews open up tomorrow with a lot of these prospects, so that's going to be the top question is, okay, which teams have you chatted with? But in all honesty, I think it's a name I haven't mentioned, but I know a lot of teams like him. But if Jeremy Sochan from Baylor falls to Cleveland, I think that's a player they could strongly consider. But I think Malaki Branham is a guy that folks should keep an eye on. He's a local prospect, played for St. Mary. He played at Ohio State, so it just makes a lot of sense here. And I think he can play meaningful minutes right away. But his potential 2-3 years from now makes him even more enticing for Cleveland because he's a long-term piece and also opens up a lot of options too because you could trade Sexton, you could trade Karis LeVert, you could trade future picks to maybe go make a bigger win-now move, all while you have a guy waiting in the wings who could be a huge scoring punch for you long-term as well.
I think we'd all like that. I mean, would any of you guys have problems with that?
If they stay at 14, sure.
I mean, if they stay there,
I got no problem.
I just don't think he's going to. I just don't think he's going to be there. I think he's more like an 8-9 pick. I think it's
because the upside's high.
Yeah, I think he's gonna go to that combine and really. Because
value.
watching him over the course of his season this year, he's took a major leap. I mean, he had a multiple 30-point games.
Got a high upside,
so
for sure.
I don't think he'll be there.
I know it's hard to say, and who knows? They might move, and they might not even be at 14. Evan, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. Evan Dremel of Locked On Cavs does a great job covering the Cleveland Cavaliers. Follow his podcast if you're a big Cavs fan, and you'll get the latest information each and every day. Evan, thanks. Good to have you on.
Thanks, guys. Take care.